Hey, I'm Pat, and in this video, we'll be explaining the user input service. So, what user input service is really just a way of you detecting input. So, either that being a person left or right clicking with their mouse, or pressing certain keys on their keyboard. So, very useful for detecting keyboard, like somebody pressing Q or Z, something like that, you know. So, obviously, local or a user input service can only be used in a local script, so not starter pack. We're gonna put this in starter player scripts. So we're gonna put a local script inside of starter player scripts. This is because obviously user input service can only work on the client when it belongs to a player, so only local scripts can use it. So only local scripts can receive input. So we're just gonna get it using get service, and I'm just calling it UIS, user input service, pretty much short for user input service. So user input service has a ton of different like methods and events and properties, a ton of different useful things, but I'm not going to go over all of them in this video, just the main important ones really. Input began and input ended really. So input began fires whenever a key or some kind of button is pushed down, so it works for either like the mouse or for like a key being pressed down on the keyboard, all that kind of stuff. So we can connect it to a function just like any other event, and it gives us two parameters here. You can see it tells us right here. It gives us the input object and the game processed event. So we're going to go over what game processed event is in a second, but input is really just the key that was pressed. So input object would just be what was pressed down, and then game processed event is basically an event. So a game processed event is when it's not exactly an event, but it's like somebody talking in chat or trying to type in a text box or something like that. Obviously, if somebody's typing in chat and they press like Q and they're typing or something, that you don't want them to just randomly fire off a fireball into the abyss or something. So game processed event is true whenever a player is like in the menu or they're typing in chat or something like that. So it's very useful for that. So we're gonna shorten it to GPE. You can also call it game processed or something. It's up to you. You know, the parameters can be whatever name you want. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna see if it's a game processed event, which is just a simple if statement to see if it's true. And if it is, then we're just gonna return. And return just stops the function right here, so it doesn't go past it at all. So it's a nice little single line if statement that keeps us from having to do like a bunch of indentation, right? So now what we want to do is have something specific happen whenever we press a button on a keyboard, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do if input. So we're going to have an if statement dot key code. So key code is just basically it gives us the key. It contains an enum that describes the kind of input used, right? So key code isn't enum, it's an enumerator, and we can in order to compare it to, you know, the key that we want to see if it's pressed down, we use enum.keycode, and then you can see we can get all the key codes in here. There's like there's so many key codes, like absolute insanity. I don't know what I just did, but we're gonna do I want to do not Z, I want to do Q. So if Q, then we can run some code, and we can also do a similar thing up here than we did here. But say if we had like multiple different kinds of key inputs, it'd be kind of useful to have a statement with a few else's here or something like that. So we got our key code. So what we're doing is we're comparing to see if our input key code equals Q, pretty much. It's not too crazy, right? So if it is, then we're just gonna print Q, or print Q pressed. And then what we can actually do here is we can print the input pressed. And another thing that can be kind of useful to know is that you can actually use a comma whenever you're printing something to print multiple values. So instead of us like using the dot here, which I'm honestly not kind of liking anymore, I kind of like using just a comma instead. We can use a comma to kind of print 2 or even 3 for like multiple values instead of concatenating it all into one string, right? And that's very useful if you're trying to print a boolean with a string, because sometimes there's different values that will error if you try and concatenate it with a string. So we're gonna run it and we're gonna see what happens. So you can see I just held down right click and it fired off an event right there, input object pressed. And if I left click, it'll do it. If I press Q, it says input object pressed. I probably should have done key code, but you can see whenever I press Q, it prints Q pressed. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch this to key code. So now you'll see I right click and it says unknown. It doesn't really know what right click is, I guess, but it's okay. You can see it also says ANS, ASDW. See, it says all the keys. Whenever you press it, it detects all of them pretty much. Right? So you can see all the keys I'm pressing now. So now what we're gonna do is, for example, say I wanted to spawn in a part where I'm like where my mouse is aiming. Like I want to press a key and create like maybe an explosion, or maybe create a lava part or something. So the way we're gonna do this is, what I'm gonna do actually first is make us a little part, and we're gonna use the touched event from last video, right? So we're gonna make our part anchored, and we're gonna call this a kill part. And I'm not gonna make it like anything crazy. I'm just gonna make it a little, maybe like a little lava thing. We can make it red or whatever. Neon. Like that. Cool. So what we'll do is we'll take this and we'll add a server script to it. And now all we gotta do is just detect when it's touched. So script.parent.touch. Connect it to our function, get the hit parameter that it returns to us, and then what we'll do is we'll check it for a humanoid to see if it's a player. Hit.parent, find first child, which is a humanoid. I'll use which is a, because it's a little bit better for finding a humanoid, really. So then we'll check to see if we found a humanoid, and if we did, then we'll do a humanoid take damage. And you can see, since we use which is a, it actually uses IntelliSense because it knows that this is supposed to be a humanoid object, which is kind of useful, right? So we'll do 25. Now what we can do with this kill part is we can just put this inside replicated storage. So now it's no longer inside the workspace, but we can clone it and parent it to workspace to kind of spawn it in whenever we want to, right? We don't really need to name the script, it's not important. So now what we want to do is spawn in our part. So this is obviously going to be like client-sided. I guess I can make it server-sided real quick. So we'll add a remote here to replicated storage. Usually you want to have folders when you're doing this, but it doesn't matter too much because we're just doing 2 objects. So we'll do a spawn part remote event. And now what we'll do is when the key code Q is pressed, we'll get replicated storage, and we'll reference our spawn part event, and we will fire it to the server to let the server know that we want to spawn a part. But the thing is, the server won't know where to spawn a part. So now what we gotta do is get the mouse's 3D position. So in order to do that, we need a player, and we're gonna get the player service first, and then get the local player, and then we can get the mouse. player get mouse. And now what we can do is mouse dot hit dot position to get its 3D position, right? 3D position of the C frame. You don't know what a C frame is yet, most likely, but it's okay. So that just gives us its position, so we can spawn the part in at the position. Now all we need is a server script that listens up to our remote event for when it's fired and spawns in the part at the place that it's given to spawn it in at. Replicated storage dot spawn part dot on server event to listen to the server event, and then we can get the player and the location is what we'll call our position variable. Now say that we want to limit how far the player can spawn the part in at, right? Because we don't want them to be spawning parts in from like a mile away. We can do something called using magnitude. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable for our range, so we can easily change the range if we want to. And I'll add an if statement to compare the player's character location to the location that they want to spawn in at, and then we'll get the distance between them to see if it's less than or greater than the range that we want to use. So for that, what we do is we really just take the player, that character, and then we get their humanoid root part. That is the primary part of the character. It's usually what you use for, you know, getting the character's position or getting or spawning something in at their position or changing their position, all that. And we're gonna subtract it from the location, which is just a vector 3. So we're taking the position, which is a vector 3, and subtracting it from another vector 3, right? And then we get dot magnitude to get the distance between, pretty much get the distance between the two vectors, right? So we got the player's location, and then we got the location they want to spawn it in. And then what we want to do is make sure that it's less than the range that we have defined up here. So if it is less than the range, then we can go ahead and spawn in our part. So now what we can do is actually we can parent this kill part to server storage because it's only being accessed by our server script, so I'm gonna parent it there instead. So now what we'll do is we'll clone our part and we'll make a variable for it, right? So game get service server storage kill part, and then we'll clone it, use the clone method, and then we can set its position. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to offset its Y position a little bit, make it a little bit higher, so that way it doesn't spawn completely in the ground, because that's probably what it's going to do, is my prediction. So let me see its size actually to see just how much I want to change it. So its size, its Y is 0.55 only, so really I only need to change this by 0.275 really, not 275. So what that'll do is it'll just move it up 0.275 studs, which is kind of what we want, and then we'll just set its parent to workspace. And what I'll also do is I'll get the breeze service, and what we can do is add the part to the breeze service, so that way the part deletes or gets destroyed after a set amount of time. So we'll destroy it after maybe 3 seconds. It'll get destroyed, right? So we go ahead and test it now, see what happens. Press Q and it doesn't work because I don't know what I'm doing. I tend to call a table value. I don't know how to use vector 3. So gotta do vector3.new to make a new vector 3. I don't know why I forgot to do that, but it's okay. So we'll go ahead and try it again, and you can see now it works, and it looks like it is spawning on top, and you can see it spawns just like how we want it to, right? We can even make a staircase out of it, but you can see if I press Q like far away from me it doesn't work, but as I get close to me it lets me spawn it in. So we have like a determined range where we can spawn it in at. and it kills us just like we wanted to, right? So kind of works like you want it to. It's pretty cool because you know, it does what it's supposed to. Not very practical or useful, but it's kind of just an example for this video. So before I finish going over this, I also want to go over input ended. I'm not gonna make any examples for it or anything, but really it's just the same as input began, but what it does is it lets you know when they stop holding a key. So input began fires when they press the key down, and then input ended fires when they let the key back up. So if you want to do something like detect a player holding down a key, like holding down left click for an automatic machine gun or something like that, right? You would take input began to listen for when they start holding the key down, and then you can start firing. And then once the input ends on the input ended event, you can stop firing. So that's basically just an example of how you'd use input ended and input began. But usually you're going to want to use input began just for single key presses. But yeah, that's pretty much it for user input service. If you want to make your own kind of script, I can give you a script to make, and I don't know if I'm gonna go over in this video. I think it's been kind of a long video, maybe. I'm not sure. I wasn't really keeping track of time, but for the script that you can make a basically like the same thing I just made. So like a script that spawns in a part at a certain location, but instead of it spawning in on the ground, what it can do is like you could have a part that either spawns up in the sky and like comes down kind of like a lightning bolt maybe, or you could have a part that spawns up in the sky and stretches down with using tween service for both of them, obviously, to kind of make like a, you know, like a spell or something. Or you can make it like grow over time or make it an explosion, you know, something like that. That could be kind of cool to do. And really you got most of the script already done. You just have to figure out how to offset it, which I kind of went over in this video, and how to tween it, which isn't too much, right? Another thing you could do maybe is, I don't know, I don't have that many good ideas for tween service, not many good examples, unless you know other things, which I have to go over in future videos. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully it helped you understand user input service a little bit better. It's not something too complex, pretty straightforward really. Hopefully it wasn't too hard to understand, but if you have any questions you can ask in the comments, and thanks for watching.